The system never told you there was a ceiling. You spent years delivering more than what was asked of you. And still, the number does not move. You were told performance gets rewarded. You were told effort gets noticed. And you believed it, because in the early years, it was true. But at some point, without warning and without explanation, the numbers stopped moving. And you kept doing everything right. Every time you sit across from your manager in your annual review, the number on the table is almost the same. 3%. Maybe 3.5% in a generous year. Enough to keep you from protesting. Not enough to make you feel like anything is actually changing. And that is where the question appears. The one very few people ask out loud. What if the problem is not you? What if the number does not reflect what you are worth, but what the system calculated you would accept? Because what most people interpret as a lack of recognition, or as some personal flaw they need to correct, is neither of those things. It is a structural mechanism, and it works with a level of precision the company benefits from you not understanding. The system that determines what you earn. Every role inside an organization sits within what is called a salary band. That band has a minimum, a midpoint, and a ceiling, calibrated with market data from some point in the past. Maybe 2 years ago, maybe 5. The band does not update itself. It updates when human resources decides to update it, which happens rarely and almost never in a way that benefits the people already inside. Within that band, performance determines where you sit. If you consistently exceed expectations, you move upward. It sounds reasonable. And in the first few years, it is. But there comes a moment, usually between the 3rd and 5th year, when that movement stops. Not because your performance dropped, because you reached the top of the band. And that ceiling is not the ceiling of your value. It is the ceiling of what the structure allows the company to pay for that role, based on data nobody may have reviewed in years. From that moment on, your annual raise no longer reflects your performance. It reflects the math of a system with nowhere left to grow. And that is when the system stops pushing. What nobody tells you, what almost no manager will proactively explain, is exactly that. Why the ceiling is so hard to see. Companies do not announce that you have reached the top of your band. There is no meeting where your manager says, "You have reached the maximum this position can pay you." That conversation almost never happens. Think about how an annual review ends when the number has nowhere left to go. You walk in expecting recognition. You walk out with the same percentage as always, and with a justification that sounds so reasonable, you do not know how to challenge it. There was no conflict, no visible bad intent, just the quiet accumulation of distance between what you earn and what the market would pay today for someone with your experience if that person came in from the outside. That distance has a name in the labor market: the loyalty penalty. It is the measurable cost of staying. There is consistent evidence that people who change companies every 2 or 3 years earn significantly more over a decade than people who rely on internal raises. Not because they are more talented, because external hiring is priced at current market rates, while internal raises move against a band that adjusts slowly, if it adjusts at all. A 3% raise costs a fraction of what a 20% market correction would cost. And as long as you do not know that gap exists, the system works exactly as designed. This can look like disorganization, like nobody is managing compensation well, but very often it is institutional convenience, not visible malice. Quiet convenience, sustained by your lack of information. The information you do not have. There is a second layer here, and it has to do with who knows what when both sides sit down for that annual conversation. Your manager knows several things you do not. They know where your salary sits within the band. They know where the ceiling is. They know, at least approximately, what the market pays for your role, because compensation teams analyze that every time there is an external search. And they know what it would cost to replace you. You, sitting on the other side of the table, usually do not know any of that. You know your current number, last year's raise, and whatever you have pieced together from informal conversations and job postings. What I just described is not a negotiation between two people with equal information. It is a conversation where one side arrives with the full map and the other arrives with fragments. That asymmetry, more than any performance metric, determines the outcome of a compensation conversation. In salary negotiations, the structural advantage almost always belongs to the company. Not because it is your enemy, because the system was never designed to share that information proactively. This is what changes when a person starts treating their market value as what it really is: intelligence, not curiosity. How the ceiling breaks. The ceiling does not break with performance. It does not break with loyalty. It does not break by waiting for the right moment, by becoming indispensable, or by taking on more responsibility and hoping someone notices. It breaks with information. Specifically, by closing the gap between what the company knows about your market value and what you know. Think about someone who has spent 4 years in the same role, with strong reviews and no meaningful raise in that time. One day, she receives an offer from another company, 21% above what she earns. She does not accept it immediately. She uses it as a reference. She asks for a meeting with her manager and comes prepared. Current compensation, market range for her role, and a clear number she is requesting. She does not bring the offer in as a threat. She brings data. The manager goes quiet in a way that says everything. They did not know she knew. The conversation that follows is the most substantive one she has had in 4 years. Not because the external offer forced the situation, because she dissolved the asymmetry the system depends on. The fiction that 3% was fair compensation could not survive contact with documented reality. That is what changes the conversation, not aggression, clarity. The 3% raise is not an evaluation of your value. In a very precise sense, it is a test of your level of information. The company's opening position each year is what it calculates you will accept. Your position is what you know. The distance between those two things is the ceiling. And a ceiling only works as a ceiling for people who do not know they are standing under one. If this channel is helping you read these dynamics more clearly, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. What this means beyond the number. When a person internalizes this logic, they stop reading small raises as proof they are not enough. They start treating compensation as what it has always been: a negotiation that never fully closes. There is no moment when the number becomes final. The system offers what it calculates you will accept. The only variable is what you know when you sit down at that table. But something else happens when a person stops waiting for the company to close the gap on its own. They stop waiting. And stopping waiting is not cynicism. It is precision. It is understanding that information about your own market value is not a luxury and not a combative attitude. It is a basic tool of professional self-protection. The person who updates that information regularly is not necessarily dissatisfied. She is someone who learned not to walk into a conversation with incomplete data when the other side always comes prepared. If you made it this far, something here resonated. Maybe because you are living this exact situation. Maybe because you just found language for something you had already felt but could not articulate. What you are feeling is not paranoia. It is not ingratitude. It is the clarity of someone finally reading the system with the right information. The company already knows what your role is worth. That was never the problem. The question is whether you know it too before you accept the number. Subscribe if you want to keep understanding the rules of work nobody explains. Leave a like if this video gave you a perspective you did not have before.